Excellent. Well, I think we'll kick it off. First off, thanks for joining us today. Our goal today is a lively conversation about growing, thinking about 2026 and having less stress. My name is Sid. I'm co-founder CEO of Wizehire. I'm joined with my really good friend, Bill. Bill, maybe a little bit of background before we kind of kick things off.
Yeah, Bill Allen, native of St. Petersburg, Florida, 25-year veteran of Paychex, and just grateful to be here with you.
Bill, this is emblematic of our partnership, I think. For those that are joining, a couple helpful reminders. We do have a Q&A that we'll do at the back of the conversation. This is going to be recorded. If you want a copy of it, we'll be sending it out. I know our team's really doing all the marketing, but maybe as a little bit of like just a level set. Building a business is a lonely journey. It's a hard journey, and I know we're going to talk a lot about that. And in our worlds, it's planning season. And I thought it would be a great way to just give back to both of our communities to share some of the best insights across all the businesses that we talk to. So I think that's like a little bit of our goal today. Bill, maybe before we get things started though, you gave a little bit of background on where you work, but I think your story is emblematic of success on Main Street. I think it'd be a great way for everyone to learn a little bit about you.
Yeah, it's funny. Before I came to Paychex back in 2000, I spent about 8 years as a general manager of a jazz club in Chicago. Something I thought I had a lot of experience going into it, and I really didn't know what I was getting into at all. The interesting thing about running a business in hospitality, as many of your clients probably do, is that human capital piece is the most important part in two fronts, right? It's not just do you have the best people to help run the business, but it's how is the public going to respond to your
Yep.
people? And the crazy thing about that business, and really my biggest takeaway from it all those years ago, I'm not sure I recognized it at the time, to be honest. It's kind of with the benefit of hindsight that I look back at it and I'm like, I was such a diverse workforce,
Hmm.
both, by age, by background, by ethnicity, so many different types of people from so many different backgrounds. And the complexity of managing that is not necessarily intuitive,
Yeah.
right? You're generally in a small business environment reacting
Yep.
rather than being proactive to set sort of standards of what that's going to look like when things don't go perfectly well. But when we were successful, when we started to really thrive, it had everything to do with our people. And it had everything to do with the fact that not only had we discovered the right people, we found a pathway by which to keep them.
You mentioned that struck you a little bit later on.
Yeah.
What was like the connective dots that maybe like gave you this aha moment that wait a second, we were doing it maybe not the right way back in the days?
Well, it's interesting. This is kind of even though I'm working for a large company, this is kind of an entrepreneurial story because when you get into sales, as I did at Paychex back in 2000, I was an individual contributor.
Yep.
Right. So I don't have necessarily a wide mindset, a global mindset about what it means for the company. I'm thinking about, can I deliver these services and products to our clients
Yep.
and can I make money at the same time? Frankly, it wasn't until I became a leader, which was sort of accidental. Someone saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. But when I became a leader, I started to reflect, like, what are my lessons? What are my experiences that are going to actually translate into building what is now my business? What is now the responsibility of me to help grow? And so I was sort of going back into my memory bank, and in that individual contributor role, I didn't have a lot of those experiences.
Yeah.
And I was like pausing and thinking, well, yeah, but I did run something at one point. What did that feel like? And there were so many aha moments in that sort of pause and reflect
Yeah.
to say, wow, this is an incredible experience I went through. I didn't know how much of that would be meaningful to me in later life. And I think that's very true of a lot of entrepreneurs. When they start their business, right, they anticipate what it's going to take to get their beautiful idea out into the world.
Yep.
But then there's always something that pops up and they're like, what just happened? And I'm interested because you and I have talked about this before, your experiences with your business. Man, COVID was a wrench that just completely changed the complexity of what so many of us were doing. And you guys navigated it in a very unique way. I'd love to get your feel on that.
Well, I love the question, and I think it's emblematic of again just like the small business journey, which is you're being reactionary. It is in the moment what's going on, and I think just not just Wizehire. I think every small business owner in that moment went through dramatic ups and downs. Just putting even like personal things aside. So for our journey, I remember the day viscerally. We're all watching, I think, the NBA at that time. It becomes very serious. We were a small company at the time, probably I would say 18 people. And the next morning, because we're just reacting to this, we had this, wave of customers just coming to us. And I think the thing that was just, I think like eye-opening for me and still sticks with me today is it wasn't the customers coming to us saying, hey, I'm done hiring, I need to cancel. But it was this fact that because we had worked with them to make some of their most difficult decisions, who to hire, they were coming to us asking questions of how are y'all navigating the
Yeah.
journey? And I think that has been this radical unlock for us as a team on our responsibility, which is why we have conversations like this on, paying it forward. And so for us, I mean, if you look at the bar graph, it's literally like you see a massive drop in hiring, as did everyone. And then, as things opened up, just things ripped, which, if you think about small businesses in that moment, what we were going through, every small business went through it. It's just this uncertainty, right? It's this journey where you don't know what's around the corner. I'm kind of curious, what did you see?
Yeah, well, before I do that, I want to ask you a question because so much of, what we serve and what we're attempting to serve for our clients is helping them navigate those most difficult moments, right? Those most uncertain moments. And I'm just curious relative to that sort of uptick you were talking about from a hiring perspective, you probably had to have some conversations with your clients to say, maybe forget how you were doing it before. Like we might have to go outside of Brunswick, Maine to start hiring.
I think with the pandemic, the whole playbook for running a business changed. Overnight, you weren't competing with, the restaurant down the street. You were competing with everyone globally, right? You were competing with the likes of an Amazon, sometimes even a Paychex, right?
Yeah.
And I think that means changing the playbook. And so many of our conversations were starting with level setting. What does your market look like? What does the dynamics of the role look like? If you haven't hired for someone in 6 months, we owe you that context because only then can you run a process thoughtfully, know what great looks like, have a realistic expectation of the outcomes. And I think to the point on like, global competition, we were having conversations educating people on remote hiring.
Yep.
I know that's something y'all did every day.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, it is interesting because again, even a company our size had to have a little bit of a small business mindset, right?
Yeah.
Because it was what we had done so far to get us to where we were was not going to work. And I think that's true regardless of the size business that you have. And I think we see that more now than ever is when you reach that point of sort of, we were joking earlier about kind of calling it terminal velocity.
Yeah.
There's so much in a small business that can get you to a certain point. And I think so many business owners that we talk to say, I got here.
Yeah.
This is amazing. But for whatever reason, I'm having a difficult time taking the next step to grow the business to that next level. And a lot of times that's based on a people strategy that they haven't been able to implement because frankly, running a small business, I was joking with
You're
you
in the
earlier.
business.
Yeah, you get up at 10 o'clock on a Saturday to go to work in a restaurant and you're like, I got great plans. We're doing some training. And then someone's like, our stove just blew up. You're like, oh God, okay, I can't do anything I wanted to do before because I'm responsible for finding a new stove. So I think that type of reaching that point is to get to that point, to recognize that is kind of a big moment in a small business's life cycle.
Look, y'all are talking to business owners every day. What are those exact moments? Like, is there like an epiphany where it's like, wait a second, what got me here is not going to get me there? It's such a trite statement to say, but like when you're living through it, like what are examples? Because I think, again, back to like our community that's here, they're all going through planning and thinking about next year. And it might be helpful just to describe some of the symptoms of when one should actually step back and reflect a little bit.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about, working with over 850,000 clients nationally is that what that looks like is often different depending on the business. But there seems to be one sort of commonality among it, which is when a business owner is feeling comfortable that they've got the message out about what their thing is.
Yeah.
Right. So there's some joy in that. There's some sort of relief in that. That entrepreneur always wants people to find joy in whatever it is they have created. The problem is when they start to reflect, as we always ask our business clients to do, is like take a moment to reflect. What did 2025 look like? Like you said, everybody's doing that right now, right? When they do that, if their reflection includes, I feel like I'm working twice as hard to get the same result, that's an inflection point. That's a point where we realize I'm still working so hard, but I'm not seeing anything on the back end from a growth perspective.
Yeah.
And inevitably, that's because some of those things we were talking about before, have we taken the next step with our strategies to recognize what does my human capital strategy look like, right? Not just does my widget work?
Yeah.
For lack of a more sophisticated way of putting it, right? And so I think for a lot of those folks, when they get to that point, they're trying to figure out how to take the next steps. And there's not just a curiosity, there's a little bit of a frustration associated with what's next? Like, how do I take that next step? I've gotten here. This was my first goal. What's my next goal?
When you think about someone in that moment, do you have like specific strategies that y'all are advising on, or like just other like kind of like mentalities? Like, you're talking about, hey, I'm working twice as hard, I'm not getting somewhere. I feel like so often it's like, we as small business owners have like taken it to the level that we need to, and we almost have to like build the business without us.
Yeah.
How do you have those conversations? Because it's like,
Well,
you're be ready to hear it.
I'm going to kind of push this back on you because you and I have talked about this so much. So I want to give you credit for this. You talk all the time about the first 90 days.
Yeah.
You talk about how that is so symptomatic of a great employee life cycle, right? Not just that first year, but the 10 years you stay with a company and your
Yeah.
enthusiasm around what the company does. I'd rather have you, frankly, tell everybody what you think, because I think the way you explain it is.
I'll give my take. I'll give my take. So, you shared, I think, the key that I think everyone that's even like here today is thinking about, which is the team that got us here is a key part of that future. But as we grow, we have to adapt to them, and how we bring every person into the business. I mean, we only get to do that once. At Wizehire, we talk about this idea of like the first 90 days defines back to like that journey that you're going to go on. And as a business owner, in a moment like this, when you're thinking about the future, I think one fair question to ask yourself before we even get to onboarding is, every day we have to like earn the right to work with our team, right? And I think the first place is you're stepping back, thinking holistically about your, hiring, onboarding, retention strategy. It's that first 90 days where, in your business, there's so much, tacit knowledge. There's things that are not documented. But when you bring someone in, I mean, we owe them context, we owe them clarity. We'll talk a bit about our partnership, but what we're working on with clients specifically, Bill, it's often about taking playbooks that may not be one size fit all, but I think definitely because both of our organizations spend time with people that are in very specific industries, we've almost learned some of the best practices. Client 100 taught us how to help Client 1000.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's the small things, right? Like, how do you deliver that offer letter? How do you follow up thereafter? How do you give them confidence when they show up for day one that they're making the right decision? Because, unlike pre-pandemic, everyone can just swipe on a phone and do another gig at the end of the day.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's changed a lot. So I think practically, Bill, I think it's often, if you've gone through this year, whether you're working with us or thinking holistically about onboarding, I would think about the people that joined your business that were most successful. Ask them where you could have done better, and start to just diagnostically, diagram it, make the notes, think about the questions that people are asking, because the more you can encapsulate that into a thoughtful 30 days, 60 days, that's not just you talking, but you also listening. I think that's the recipe for success.
Yeah, you bring up something that's so meaningful to me and kind of close to my heart, which is part of that reflection process as you look at the people that you have is sometimes accepting that maybe what got you here and who got you here isn't necessarily who's going to get you.
Those are hard conversations, but they have to be done.
They have to be. But I think inevitably, when you really reflect on that 90-day process as it is for you today, that is so emblematic of your ability to find great people and keep great people. And so much can occur in that time frame.
Yeah.
It's not hard to necessarily get someone who's going to be blown away by you. And I'm sure everybody who works for you is blown away by you. They're like, they love your vision. They love your enthusiasm.
You're too kind. Yeah.
But then at some point it's got to be like, okay, awesome. What does it mean for me?
Yes.
Right. And sometimes what it means for me can be very different depending upon who you're hiring. And it's interesting. We've talked about this so many times. When I got into the business 25 years ago, there weren't as many generations in the workforce as there are right now. And certainly for those generations, there was not as much difference between what each one wanted. And so as you reflect upon what my 90-day strategy needs to be, whether you try and do it yourself or you find someone to assist you with it, it has to be reflective of everyone you're hiring. Because there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all.
Bill, I'm glad you're saying this because, back to like even the pre-pandemic, post-pandemic dichotomy, right? You are now competing to retain someone that can go to Amazon at the end of the day, right?
Based on everything you gave them, they're now ready to go somewhere else. Yeah.
When I talk to a lot of our customers, it's often about the unawareness of like what those larger organizations are offering and realizing in some nuggets that maybe there is more to do there. Can you talk a bit about specifically how you do that though, right? You're having conversations with your team, you're hearing all these things. they're kind of like in the past, like woulda, coulda, shouldas for the future, but now they're must-haves. I'm talking to people about everything from like benefits to like training, development. Like, how can a small business owner today navigate a lot of that?
Yeah, well, we were talking about this a little bit at the beginning, that so many of our small business owners came from big companies,
Yeah.
right? And probably left with a mindset of, I know what I'm not going to do anymore, right? But often there's not an acceptance of, but this is what I am going to do. Sometimes what larger companies can do, those that have the scale,
Yeah.
Amazon's got 25 people doing Cobra, right? So like the companies that have the
Yeah. Our
scale,
clients get the letter in the mail and don't know what to
yeah,
do.
exactly. So to have sort of a recognition early on that I know what I can do and I know what I can't do. But I want to reflect on some of the experiences for myself when I was employee and I felt some joy, or I
Yeah.
felt a connection, or I felt a part of something. That's a great place to start because that's a very emotional connection that needs to get made. When you start there and when you recognize that, and when you ask your employees when those moments happen for them, right? You're
Yeah.
going to get some good stories and you're going to get some difficult stories.
We have to
Those
hear it
are
all.
areas of opportunity. But when you get the good stories, embrace that. That means something. And then make sure that is not only injected in your process, but it's injected in your people, meaning that the people meant to lead these folks that we're bringing on board understand and are able to deliver the same exact message you're trying to deliver. And the way that typically manifests itself is, yeah, you've got to have some processes in place. There's going to have to be some boxes to check,
Yeah.
right? Depending upon what state you're in. And so many of our clients are now in multiple states. You don't know what California wants you to do versus what Texas wants you to do, versus what New York wants you to do.
Yep.
So there's some compliance aspects there you got to think about. But as you start to put together a program that's going to attract your next great talent, it has to be reflective of the experience that the employee is going to have that's going to bring them joy, give them the expectation of longevity. And then when you get through that 90 days, continue to demonstrate your commitment to them
Yeah.
by providing them with early opportunities to grow, early opportunities to understand what their next role might be in the company, and give them that level of comfort that they made the right choice.
How do y'all think about like career pathing and all these things from like the enterprise? How do you make that accessible? Again, back to like, I'm running the shop. I really want to get out of running the shop and work on the shop, but what has worked in practice for you there?
Well, there's a level of flexibility that's required for us. And again, this comes with scale.
Yeah.
I always joke that sometimes when I want to get a great piece of fish, I go to the fish store. But sometimes you need to go to a place that has everything, because
Yeah.
that's where you need to shop. And to a certain extent, Paychex has become everything to every company because of the ability we have to look at you in a sort of a one with time frame, one nugget of your growth, to be able to say, this is what we think you need right now. This is what you need to be looking at right now. And to identify that, again, can be different for everybody. But if
Yeah.
someone says to us when we sit down with a client for the first time, or someone who's even interested in hearing what we might be able to do, we ask a lot more questions than demonstrate what it is we do, because we frankly don't know what we do yet. And so you can tell us what you need us to do. But I have heard over my experience so many stories about a business owner or key members of that team, wanting growth, wanting to move into new markets, bringing new products. All of those carry with them a human strategy
Yeah.
that needs to be implemented in a certain way. And sometimes that is through training, sometimes it's through development, sometimes it's through reward programs, sometimes it's through benefit enhancement, sometimes it's through having a real talented, experienced HR professional who knows how to treat HR for what it is. It is a money-making enterprise.
It's strategic.
It
Yeah.
is, it is literally, I love when people are like, well, HR doesn't make us any money. It makes you a lot of money. It makes you a lot of money. But your story is more important than mine relative to this, because you are an entrepreneur. You have built a small business out of something that was your like genius baby, and now you're like, okay, I've done it to a certain extent with so much more to come. I want to hear about your experience as a small business owner. What's that look like?
I think a couple of things I reflect on that maybe are helpful for someone thinking about their next juncture, as you kind of like frame it. I think it's one, I love this idea that you gave, which is like almost make like the list of like what needs to happen.
Yeah.
And then out of that, what do you truly love to do?
Yeah.
And I think first off, it's thinking about those things that need to happen, that if it's okay if that they're not your expertise, it's okay if that they're not in your zone of genius. The thing that I think a business owner needs to think about is how do we solve for that, right? Sometimes it's developing someone in the team to take ownership there. Sometimes it's partnering with someone else to augment that, back to like the HR example. I think that's like one diagnostic thing that, especially at the end of the year when you're reflecting, so critical. I think you and I were joking earlier, when we were a much smaller company and we were going through everything, I used to dread going to the mailbox. We
Yeah.
had gone from 3 states to 15 states. There was a surprise waiting for me every single day, which is why I think like we started to work with, an organization like Paychex to really handle a lot of that. I think the other thing that I think often about is getting the most insights from the team. Because as you're scaling, as you're thinking about, giving away these hats, right, which you should almost like routinely have the exercise of, back to like what you love, what do you need to spend time on? I think it's thinking about the information you're missing. So I've often spent so much time just with the team that's on the ground, working with customers, talking to customers, those that had a good experience, bad experience. I think those are the things to be doing right now, because then you can holistically put it back to, okay, do I even have the right map of what's working and not working in the business? Then I can think about the talent that I need. And I think these insights, they're simple enough, but I think it's a recipe of how we do big company planning at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
Which often takes like 3 months. And I think you could do it in a weekend as a business owner these
Yeah.
days. I think those are the nuggets that I would give to people. But I mean, we also have to remember it's a journey full of ups and downs. And I think that the third thing I would say is finding a community is so central.
Couldn't agree
Finding
more.
partners, trusted advisors, because if you're going through what has been a frenetic 2025, right? You think about where we were at the beginning of the year, tariffs, where we are now. We don't know what next year looks like. And it's okay to have that uncertainty. But I think one thing that has helped me, and I think if you're going through this journey right now, is to find more like-minded entrepreneurs, business owners, managers, peers, and just seek to learn, seek to listen, and bring that back, because you have a responsibility to bring it back to your team at the end of the day.
Yeah. That's one of the hardest things. I love that you brought up 2 points there. The first is that listening to your people in sort of as much humility as you possibly can, right? You're the one that built the thing. You're the one that came up with the idea to get it started.
It's a shared responsibility now.
Gotten here, yeah. Whatever's gotten you here is relevant, is important. And I think too often as small business owners, what we do is imagine that the only feedback we need to take to heart is that which is brought to us, right? And that tends not to be great feedback, right? That tends to be like the benefits are not great this year, and so that's the only information we have relative, because one person is frustrated. And by the way, that can be a consequence of not understanding the changes because someone hasn't explained it in such a way. Business owners aren't professionals in talking about health insurance, right? And so when
you learn a lot on the journey.
you do, right? And you and I talked about that. You've had to go through that. It's like somebody brings you a couple of options. You're like, I don't know what this means. This is not my specialty. But I really appreciate you listening to the folks in a way that gives them an opportunity to tell you what will make their worlds better. Interestingly, what I've heard so many times from business owners years ago, not so much now, I used to hear the phrase all the time, yeah, my people would leave for $1 more an hour, go across the street. And I used to think, I don't think that's the reason.
Yeah.
I just don't. And as time has gone on, when we ask, because we spend a lot of time with our clients' employees, obviously with their permission, to give us information as well, because we're seeking feedback about whether or not we're providing a value to them, right? It's our responsibility to make sure we're contributing to that journey. To say, hey, are you happy with what we're doing? We know your boss is, but are you happy with what we're doing? So that first part of it, I just love. And I wanted to just reference that again.
What's like a practical question from those kind of dialogues and interviews that maybe would be helpful for someone as they're thinking about what's working, what's not working in the business today, how to like improve for next year? Maybe a couple like practical examples.
Well, the first thing I would say is there's some value sometimes in doing this anonymously.
Correct.
So to have a tool that will enable you to ask these questions in a way that isn't you sitting in the high chair with your person sitting in the low chair across from you as you ask them the questions. With wink, wink, you better say what I like, which may not be your
intention. It could be even an anonymous Google. Something.
Right. But some of the questions, and I'm going to go back to the second thing you said, which is connecting yourself with like-minded entrepreneurs. The interesting thing about that is if you sit in a room with 10 entrepreneurs, aren't all of you at a different stage? Right.
And that's valuable.
It's incredibly valuable because you might be able to ask, hey, when did you reach that terminal velocity point? And what did you do to get to the next stage? And a lot of them are going to look at you and say, I think what we've said, which is your people strategy is not perfect. Right. And that's something you've got to get better at. But if you ask those questions of your peers, you're going to have a little bit of a roadmap that tells you how others have gotten there. And again, smartest people in America are small business owners. They just are. That's a cliche, I know, but they are. But sometimes they need to not be so smart. Sometimes they need to be able to take a step back and be like, I want to hear what somebody else says.
Yeah.
How did you get there? That's probably going to give you some questions that are going to be relevant. I would say they're very simple in my mind. The first question you want to ask is something along the lines of, do you see yourself here in 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
If so, why? If not, why? Be honest. Give me that feedback and always give them an opportunity. I really don't like, I'm going to get in trouble for this. I really don't like surveys that are just numeric.
Just the form. Just the form.
A 4. Like, what does that mean?
It's the white box where you have a lot more insight.
I would like very much for people to always have the opportunity to give comments, but do you see yourself here? And the other question is, why did you come here?
Yeah.
And why do you stay? They're very open-ended questions, right? We have a tendency to really want to get those yes/no questions. Those are so pointless in conversations because we all vacillate back and forth between what is yes, no, what does no mean here? Am I being negative?
Yeah.
Right? There's an intrinsic negativity in saying no to something, as opposed to being able to say, hey, I think this is a little bit of a problem, comma. But man, wouldn't it be cool if we did this?
Yeah.
Because in that, if you ask the right questions, and again, they're open-ended questions. Why do you stay? Why did you come here? Do you see yourself here in 5 years? If you ran the business, what would you do differently?
That's a great question.
Yeah, those types of insights can be so valuable. It doesn't mean we always act on all of them. But if I get 5 that sound very similar, then maybe that's a pretty clear pathway for where I should be headed.
Here's the question, Bill. So if someone is going through this process, they're diagnosing what's working, what's not working, they're getting input. It's not a one-man band. You have to have leaders in your business to help you grow. How do you, for those that are like now, a lot of our customers are going through that trajectory. They're building out, their team. How do you think about investing in that next generation of leaders? Any insights, like things that y'all do with particularly like the Paychex customers?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think just owning this as an organization, I don't know that we were particularly good at this aspect of the business as recently as 5 years ago. What we have developed is a sort of a professional trajectory map that we can give to clients to say, hey, if this person's interested in leadership, when's the right time to ask them?
Yeah.
Right.
It's not when you need it.
It's not when, hey, do you want to sit in the seat? Which, by the way, is how I became a leader, because there was nobody else left. And they were like, hey, can you go sit in the seat till we find somebody better? But in getting to the root of what someone's motivation is, where someone sees themselves, goes back to what you said before.
Yeah.
That's the first 90 days. I need to be able to ask that question. It's a little cliche to ask it in an interview, right? Do you want to be in leadership? Because what is somebody going to say?
Yeah. There's only one.
What do you want me to say? But after being there for a little while, experiencing the culture, getting a sense as an employee of whether or not the business has fulfilled my expectations of them and vice versa, and they're equally important, to then get with someone and to say, again, along the same lines as where do you see yourself in 5 years, asking them, hey, we're going to have a pathway. You're reiterating the growth expectation. You're making them part of the journey. Even if they don't take it, you're saying, do you have interest in leadership? And when somebody says yes, this is the most important thing I can stress about this. If you say yes and you don't do anything with it until you need them, you're going to lose them, because they've already demonstrated to you that they want to be a leader. And then 2 months later, they're like, what happened? What did I get? I got a promise that if ever there's a role, I might get it. So have a program in place to give them real tools, trainings that you can use to teach them, because the engagement that comes from that experience gives you a realistic expectation that it's on the horizon, as opposed to a promise.
I want to double click on that one, Bill. Yeah. So, so often in small business land, the next role may not be there, right? Yeah, it's true. You're talking about, a pathway to get there, but those are complex dialogues to navigate, maybe some tips, like, again, just thinking very specifically, like, the business may not grow and need someone for 12 months. Is training the only answer? Like, are there other, like, just like ways to like keep this a fluid dialogue?
This is the really hard part, I think. And I'm saying this with a smile because I'm not a practitioner of this. I just get to talk about it. Right?
Hard-earned lessons, though.
But it's a lot harder for the people that are on this call and for others who will see it, to actually to be able to articulate a pathway by which this can occur. But sometimes that reinforcement is not just training. Sometimes we have to do the thing that is hardest for us, which is to release ourselves from the tethers of being the only one that can do the important stuff,
Yes.
right? Like be able to say, God, it's going to be really hard, but I need someone else to manage this account now. And I'm going to ask you to do that. And even when there's not necessarily more compensation, this is a trap because if there's not more compensation, there's only so long you can put someone into a role with more responsibilities. But the manner by which you deliver that responsibility is so important. Because if I deliver
It
it
is
in
the
such
pathway itself.
yeah,
Yeah.
if I deliver it in such a way that, hey, this is going to be experiential for you.
Yeah.
I really want you to be able to experience this. And I want you to be able to get the necessary experience. Because again, we can put you in a classroom, teach you about leadership all day long, but you got to experience it to really understand how to do it. And so I'm going to give you these pathways by which to have those experiences. And I think when you do that, and then you reinforce it with consistent follow-up, the last thing I'll say.
Yeah.
If I give you a responsibility that is lending you down the path of becoming a leader, and I have no follow-up, I have no positive reinforcement or demonstrating areas of opportunity with you. That is very simply said, I tell you you're doing a great job or not so great job. If I give you no feedback, that is not development. That's a task, right? So if I'm going to give you something to do to help you become a better leader, I better have follow-ups to allow that to become developmental because the smartest guy in the room to do that is you. And if I'm not hearing from you, I'm like, thanks for giving me a new job, Sid, but you haven't given me any pathway budge to.
So I think another kind of thing that just dovetails off of this. And again, these are like the nuggets that I think help people at this moment in time, thinking about all the stress from the org. It's often about, managing the growth of individuals. I think a lot of small businesses don't do evaluations. They don't do reviews.
Yeah.
It's all put off until like the one moment. How do
They
you
want to get rid of somebody. Yeah.
that, or when they're being faced with the, hey, is there a gig for me later kind of convo? How do you advise clients on building continuous learning, continuous development, continuous feedback? It's not done all overnight, but maybe this is also like an important thing if you haven't done it this year, something to institute next year. Any thoughts or advice?
Yeah, I think this is a really important conversation to have because I'll go back to the restaurant experience. If I'm a restaurant and I'm a single unit, right? That process by which I can institute that is going to be very different than if I'm in a law firm, single unit, right? It's going to be very different. Hours are different. People are there on different days.
Yeah.
It's a different workforce, different age group, generally speaking. And then you make it even more complex when I'm a painting contractor and no one is actually in the office ever. How do I actually accomplish that? So sometimes the first questions are, how am I going to do it using a methodology that's going to be relevant?
Yep.
Right. And a technology in some cases that's going to be relevant. Can I let them do whatever I need them to do on their phones, for example?
Yeah.
For certain developmental programs or answering certain surveys or so on and so forth. But we do very early on kind of try and dig deeply. And I want to hear your opinion about this too. Dig deeply into that sort of what is your expectation of the business in the next 6 months, 2 years, 5 years? And then we're going to come back to you with reflections on a people strategy that's going to help you get there.
Yeah.
And part of those reflections are going to be in if you're not telling your people where they're doing well or where their areas of opportunity are, and if you're not giving them subsequent developmental programs that are organized and, by the way, inspectable.
Yep.
Right? If I'm not doing that, then you're leading with hope. And hope's a great thing, but it's generally not a particularly executable strategy, other than keeping everybody smiling until they realize it's not getting them anywhere.
Oh,
but this is, again, you live this in practice. So how do you do it?
I think one of the big unlocks for us was introducing a consistent space for that development. We actually provide this to a lot of our clients. I think there's a couple like blog posts and like articles, but it's a one-on-one, right? Focus time, not about the work, but the person. And I think a couple of things that I've done there just have back to consistency. It's the same framework,
Yep.
right? It's like, like to a point where I'm sure some of the teams watching this and it's like rolling their eyes like, oh, what are the highs of the week? What are the lows of the week?
Yep.
And you build that routine so that as things come up, you're making it a place where you can learn and listen about the challenges, but then also it becomes a place of, deep trust where in real time, you can give that feedback.
Yep.
Right. Because I think back to development is like one side of like kind of growing someone. The other is obviously like when there's challenges. And the moment you opt for, I think my new favorite way of saying it is like the kind lie, you are making it hard for everyone. Right. Some things like not up to your standard, but it's okay. You kick a can a little bit. By the time you have that tough dialogue, they've never heard it. And you're doing a disservice to your team. You're doing a disservice to that individual. And so often it's that one-on-one it's a space of like, look, I think the question I often asked, how is it going? How's the work going? How did you feel about this?
Yep.
Level set on what that individual's perspective on some performance or outcome was. And then that's the place to like be like, let's be clear here, right? And those are like hard calls, hard conversations.
Yep.
But I think we have to do that back to like the people strategy at the end of the day, because it's not like if some part of your business is not doing well and you start to diagnose it and you come to the conclusion that it's on like the team, the process, or whatever the case, it falls on you fundamentally.
Yes.
Right. We have, as business owners, we have all this just tacit knowledge, right? That's like not documented. We have to give people feedback. We have to give them clarity. And I think from there, you can start to have, much easier dialogues sooner. And I think that's the one thing I keep impressing on people, which is, you cannot, you cannot read someone's mind, right? You have to build a space for them to like share what's on their mind. You and equally owe them context so that it's never a surprise. So those are a couple of practical things that I think about often.
I love that. I think the best way to summarize what you just said is trust, right? Like,
and it's earned. It's
earned.
not given.
It is. And I think, again, I go back to when I started in this business, and I say this with total confidence. The number of business owners who would articulate that they really cared about their employees 25 years ago is dwarfed by the number of employers today that they say they care about their employees. I mean, genuinely care about their employees.
Yeah.
And that is a cultural shift that I think is born as much of necessity as it is of just being a kinder.
I mean, we're realizing it's harder, right? Like if it takes you 3 months to fill the role, the retention is this, like you're seeing it finally, but I think then it's just this moment as you then connect with orgs that are growing. Like, why did it work there? Oh, maybe it's this servant leadership mentality or whatever the case. So I'm seeing this as well.
Yeah, and I think the way that manifests itself within the context of what you're talking about is when you ask people, when you have regular contact points. And again, I do think there's some level of cadence to that needs to provide an expectation that you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Because part of the problem is people say,
once a year.
I'm gonna do quarterly one-to-ones with you, right? And then I'm sitting around looking at my watch saying a quarter was 2 quarters ago.
Yeah.
Like, why are we not doing that? So setting an expectation for yourself through a system that, by the way, provides some level of compliance coverage as well.
Yeah.
Because we tend to want to do one-to-ones with people when they're not performing well. And there can be some legal problems associated.
You got to be doing it everywhere, every day.
But just have a framework by which you are making those touch points. And what I think is so important of what you just said, the trust that comes out of that, particularly when you take a moment to say, how's it going? And then be like, I really mean it. How's it going?
Yeah.
Right. There's so many great books and so many great people. There are people way more intelligent than I that have spoken at length about this. But those connections that you make, even when they're not necessarily personal, because not everyone's comfortable with the personal connections sometimes that you make, although I think they're important.
Yeah.
Making a professional connection is an investment in them believing that they are part of something critical, that they're part of something big, and that leaving would deprive them of the opportunity to be a part of this great dream that you have.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I can go to Google and get better dental insurance. Right. So that's how I feel about it. It's a great point.
So we often talk with customers about building this from the beginning as like an employer value proposition, being clear about your mission, being clear about your vision. I think that's another thing, definitely, if you haven't identified, at the outset of if it's kind of like, if it's not documented, then does it exist? I think is one thing that probably is something to do right now. You're probably meeting a lot of people that are going through this journey. They're very reactive. How do you think about employer value proposition and what that means today, right? We joked earlier about, this is no longer the case that like someone's going to leave your role for like, a dollar or two more, right? How do you think about total rewards? How do you think about that full package and the ways to articulate that? Because it's becoming way more complex.
It is. And I think, again, it's difficult to put that into a box and put it on a shelf. Because every single business owner I've ever spoken to, and I've literally spoken to thousands and thousands and thousands of business owners, as have you, it almost seems like everyone's a little different. There's a little more nuance to the way that they approach the business.
Yeah.
Probably in a scale that comes from, I don't care about my employees, although there's far less of those people now. to all I care about is leaving a legacy where when this business is here after I'm gone, these people will have risen up to a point where it's affecting them, their families, their communities. I obviously tend to be more fond of these people
Yeah.
up here. But I think when you're trying to figure out what that value proposition is, it does start with, it's funny. I used to tell this story when I would do trainings years and years ago, where I was in with a business owner one time and I didn't have a plan for it. As you and I were joking, we don't plan very well for stuff when we go out and talk to people. I was sitting in front of this business owner. I think they had 9 employees. And I asked a question that it was a difficult question at the time. I said, "Who's your best employee?" And they were like, "Tom's my best employee. Why do you ask?" And I said, "I have to ask a really important question. What would it mean if you lost Tom?" Right.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of that value proposition comes from a recognition of why you love Tom.
Yeah.
Right? What it is about Tom that gives you confidence every morning you wake up with your dream in the back of your head about what Wizehire is going to become.
Yep.
You know, you got Tom right there. And within the construct of understanding that you have Tom next to you, you also have to find another Tom, right?
Yeah.
Because if you want to get to that next level, that's necessary. I think there's so much to be found in just, again, reflecting. If the employer value proposition is to get you anywhere, it's to recognize where you have great success, great areas of opportunity, but that is often going to come from the people that have contributed to your success as much as it is coming from what you think is right.
This is excellent. I feel like so often it becomes about like, the minutia, but I think it's better to like step back and reflect that way. Um, I have to ask because you almost like open up the topic. We didn't chat about this, but you're kind of getting to succession planning a little bit here.
A little bit.
Okay, so I'm running a scaling business. Maybe I'm going from 1 to 2 units. We talked about, the team that's here today. We talked about retention. We talked about developing leaders. Part of that is growing internally. Part of that's growing externally.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that and how, someone that's reflecting on what they can achieve next year and like maybe the things that they should get ahead of when it comes to succession planning.
I feel like a broken record when I say this. There's so much in that, and the conversation really has to be around what does that look like for you, right? Because foundationally, if your goal is to build this business up so you can leave it to, for example, your kids,
Yep.
right? That's a profoundly different conversation from my perspective and from my team's perspective than it is, I would like to be bought by private equity.
Yep.
Right. Those are really different questions, different pathways that have to be taken. I think one commonality in those pathways, though, is recognizing the vulnerabilities that exist within your business. And often you mentioned the multi-state vulnerabilities, right? So many more businesses now have employees in multiple states. There are vulnerabilities associated with that
Yeah.
that can really negatively impact your business. And so I think having those conversations up front to say, and it's uncomfortable, who's getting this?
Yeah.
That's a silly way to say it. Are you selling it at retirement? Right. And are you going to be looking for a private buyer? That's a different conversation than private equity.
Yeah.
That's a different conversation than maybe I'm getting scooped up by a company that does what I do. It's a different conversation than I want to give it to my daughter, Kelly. So we have to have that conversation first. And then from there, we can put together a strategy that will both protect the business, but also protect the assets of the business, which is led by the human capital that works there.
Incredible. I was going to go into the direction of an ESOP, but maybe we'll save that for later because that's obviously
make my brain explode.
Look, I think we've covered maybe the gamut of, things to reflect on. Bill, maybe before we get to questions, I know there's a bunch that have been sent in. Other advice, just, things that you've gone through your journey, advice that you're giving to people as they, go through this reflective period. Again, our clients don't get the insights from peer companies. What else do you want to share with the community?
Well, I think what you do is a great example of a business having a recognition that they can't go it alone. And when I say this, I want to be very, very clear to your audience. I'm not just advocating for my company here. I'm
advocating for small businesses.
Yeah, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be a voice in this conversation. But the truth is, there are varieties of ways out there you can get help.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why small business owners are reluctant to ask for help is not because they don't believe that it would be worthwhile. It's because they don't have the time, right? So invite someone into a conversation with you that has a level of expertise, whether it's me, it's you, someone else in our space. Ask someone who has a level of expertise, what does that look like based on what I'm trying to achieve?
Yeah.
I think there are so many opportunities where we can just sit ourselves down with humility and say, okay, I've got to pause. I'm running out of breath here. And so sitting down and recognizing I'm on the pathway of where I thought I would be going, albeit with a lot of different, landmines that
We don't know what the pathway is when we get started.
don't. But seek guidance. And so for some people, that might be a financial professional, that might be a CPA. For some people, it's looking at outsourcing some of these functions
Yeah.
that frankly are revenue generating only in so much as they help you retain your talent, but you lose way more money. We say this all the time. You and I talk about it, right? How much does it cost to lose a great employee?
Oh, it's orders of magnitude.
It's
orders of magnitude.
unbelievable, right? So if you're doing everything you can to not lose that employee and you're continuing to grow, the more you grow, the less time you have to reserve for making sure that employee stays with you. It's probably time from time to time. It's not from time to time. It eventually will be time to have a conversation with somebody else to talk you through a pathway that may assist you in those areas so you can get back to focusing on the growth.
I think that's what I think before we get to Q&A, we should leave everyone with, which is, as you go back and think about 2025, you think about the ups and downs and things that you can predict. I would make a list of, again, what are the insights from that? What are the things that are missing? And ask the hard question. What are things that you personally, as leaders, want to focus on? And it's very okay to actually bring in a team around you to support with that. Because at the end of the day, we owe our team, we have to earn the right to work with them day in and day out.
Yes.
And I think being strategic here, building, this community of trusted advisors is how you can not only do right by your team, do right by your customer, outdo your competition. I think that's the recipe that maybe the enterprise has figured out that we're hoping we can paraphrase and share with the teams here. So Bill, this is awesome.
Yeah,
we got a bunch of questions. I definitely want to get to a couple of these. So here's maybe a little bit of level set. So we have folks that are less familiar with Paychex. Paychex has been around for a long time. You work with customers in many ways. Help us understand, who is Paychex? What do y'all do? What are the specific things? And I did not make up this question. This is a great one. I just want to let your marketing team know. Take it away, man.
Sounds like a softball. No, I appreciate you asking that question because being with a company for 25 years, I have to have some belief in what we've accomplished and what we are going to accomplish. We're a 55-year-old company, and we were founded as a company to provide payroll for small companies. In fact, our founder, Tom Golisano, who now spends most of his time in philanthropy, which we're very grateful for, is, basically said, I want to get 100 clients. I'm going to run out of my garage, and that's all I need, went a little bit beyond that expectation. The reason I tell that story, though, about starting with small business is because that's where we grew up. Over the last 55 years, everything we've added to impact the client's life cycle has been with that first client in mind, that first 5-employee company.
Yeah.
That became 500. And all along that journey, what makes Paychex really, really unique, and I say this all the time, is we are one of the only HCM companies that can be all things to all companies. And what I mean by that is we could be one thing for you today and an entirely different thing for you 3 years from now based on what you need. There's scalability up, there's scalability down, there's responses to recession type environments, there's responses to up markets. We have every conceivable piece of support within benefits, within compliance, within safety, within insurances to be able to say, when you're ready for this, this is where it is. What I'm really proud of is that our team has evolved, again, understanding the small business mentality. We have evolved into more of a consultative company than we used to be. And I'm proud of that.
I think that's why we're so aligned, right?
Yeah,
It's the service
100%.
mentality at the end of the day.
Sitting down and asking a lot of questions and saying, you know what, this might be really important for you now. Even when somebody asks for it, we might say, this is probably a little bit much for what you need right now. Start here. We'll keep having conversations about it, and then we'll give you a pathway by which to get to that part. But as a proud member of the company, I can say serving small business America has always been at the forefront of what we do. And I think we've evolved into recognition that when we do that, the employees that those companies serve thrive, and the communities in which they live thrive. And I know that that can sound a little bit like a marketing slogan, but when I leave this company, at some point, nothing yet definitive on the horizon in case anybody's watching. But when I leave this company, I really hope that that's a legacy that I can point to, is that we really did help businesses thrive in such a way that their communities benefited from it.
This is, again, why I think our two companies are so aligned.
Agreed.
This question came in. So with this small business growth mentality focus, you'll offer a lot. There are a lot of folks that are, not familiar with, the PEO model, the ASO model, there's a lot of jargon here. There's a history of these things going back to like, Florida in like the 70s or something.
Yeah.
Maybe give like those that are less aware some context. Paychex is a PEO. What is PEO? I think we got a couple of those questions that came in.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, a PEO is very simply defined as a co-employment model, and without getting too complex around what that means, it essentially enables small businesses the opportunity to enter into a larger group for the purposes of accessing so many of the resources we've kind of talked about today. So it gives you access to a health insurance program that's designed for 150,000 people.
This is how you
Not
compete with Amazon
how we
for
compete with Amazon.
yeah.
Yeah. It gives you a 401k that's best in class integrated into the payroll system, but it also gives you all of the HR support that we have as a 19,000 employee company, right? All the safety support, all the accesses to ancillary insurances like EPLI, workers' compensation insurance. So the ability to get into that model enables you access to everything we do as a company. And again, how that model looks is different for every company that comes on board based on their needs. But it really allows you to scale because we take away a lot of those liabilities associated with opening a business in Cincinnati, Ohio, and having to pay 72 local taxes.
You won't be afraid to go get the mail anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But additional to that, having those proactive approaches where within our context, we're trying to, again, go back to what I said before. When your business grows, you stay with us longer.
Yeah.
Our average client retention on our PEO is over 5 years. And that is because what we do tomorrow is not what we do today. So it enables you access to a scalable solution. It's going to give you exactly what you need right now. Could just be simply access to much better benefits, Fortune 500 benefits, crossing the spectrum of what your employees need, which isn't just health insurance and 401k. Employees are demanding mental health wellness. They're demanding financial wellness. And so being able to bring all those things together, that if you're a business that has 25 employees, it is impossible for you to access them, or if you do access them, it's near impossible to manage them.
I love that framework because obviously a lot of the data suggests that companies that work with PEOs grow faster than the average company. They're growing faster than GDP, as an example. One of the questions that came in was, if I don't have a dedicated HR person, what would you suggest I prioritize first? Right? I'm at that 25 company stage. I'm thinking about next year. We just went through a litany of things to do. What are like the top things you'd suggest to prioritize?
It's a great question because, and there's one of those questions that I will answer differently than I would have 10 years ago. I think 10 years ago, I probably would have focused on compliance, to make sure it's, we talk about employee handbooks. It's like such a boring thing to talk about, but foundationally, are you protecting the organization with some level of policy in place to ensure that just basic fundamental rules are being followed, right? And that could be on a state level or a federal level. While that's important, and while I think that should absolutely be outsourced, whether it's to me or somebody else,
Yeah.
no HR person or no business owner gets into business to work on compliance stuff.
Focus on why you got into business.
If you ask, and we talk to people all the time through our association with Society of Human Resource Management and the more than 700 HR professionals that work for Paychex, they will tell you most business owners are talking about a better people strategy.
Yep.
And what that means is probably the first thing the business owner, or if the person on the call happens to be, the CFO or a key employee to the company, is to regroup with that business owner and anybody else who's got a vested interest in the next 5 years and say, where are we going?
Yep.
And then sort of take a step back and be like, okay, what got us here is not getting us there. So what's my strategy going to be? And I wish it were as simple to say, I know what the strategy should be for everybody. What I can say is the first step is reflection and a really good understanding of what your 5-year strategic plan is. And then you can take a step back and say, okay, what am I going to need to attack? Sometimes your people are already there.
Yeah.
Right. It's not necessarily that you got to hire more people. Sometimes they say you got to hire a lot more people and you can't find them in Brunswick, Maine. I keep mentioning Brunswick, Maine, because that's where I was raised. And my wife would laugh if I didn't mention that I was from Brunswick, Maine, because I get in every conversation I ever have. But it is an opportunity to really be able to align your strategic vision with what it's going to take for human capital to support that strategic vision. And once you do that, it actually becomes kind of clear, Sid, and you know this.
Oh, I think it's the biggest unlock, right? It's like we have the bias of like HR of past, when now it's like, hey, people are the business. It's fundamental to growth, and having a clear strategy that aligns with the future is the answer at the end of the day.
100%.
I like this one maybe because it's a little bit about both of us, but we have this question came in anonymously. When you think about our partnership, how is it maybe in your eyes that we help, our clients at the end of the day? I have my take, but I'm kind of curious about yours.
Well, I'm going to be short because I'm actually more curious about yours. You know, it's really funny when I keep talking about this, the small business owner needs to step away from I can be all things to all circumstance. Man, does that translate into a company like ours, right? I mean, look, 25 years ago, payroll was pretty simple.
Yeah,
It's
you called the bookkeeper and they did it,
that was
basically.
it. You did it on a dome book. No one's going to know what that is, but that's how you used to do it, to hand write everything out and then hand write the check. You know, what we see now is our clients are demanding a level of expertise that we often have to say out loud, we don't have.
Yeah.
Right. And so finding strategic partnerships with companies that have experience outside of our own scope. Look, 19,000 employees, but we've been living in our own house for 19 years. You talk to me whenever sorry, 55-year-old company. I say me 25 years. When somebody comes in from another company, the first thing I have to say is, I need to know what you learned because I've only been here.
We're jaded. We need new insight.
I need you to tell me something other than what I've been talking about for the last 25 years. So by having a partnership with a company like Wizehire, we learn more from you than we're going to learn on our own
Yeah.
because the experiences you bring into the relationship are very unique. And you don't look at it through the prism of, I'm going to do what Paychex says I have to do. You're going to say, we're going to do it the way that we do it. You chose us for a reason, and we certainly did. And you chose us for a reason. So tell me your thoughts on
Yeah,
that.
I think it gets to what small businesses need first and foremost. And I think what all of us have learned, I think over the last, couple of decades is the enterprise has the best tools, the best resources. And I think both of our companies are on this mission to make it accessible for
Yep.
Main Street. And I think one insight there is that it's not the tools, it's the strategy, it's the support. And I think when we started this partnership, going back now a couple of years, it's it's really about how both of our organizations give thoughtful advice. We step back, we let people kind of digest it and make the right decision for them. And I think that leads to making decisions on how to grow, how to hire, how to retain. And then I think there's one more audience member that's really key to think about, which is the employee. Because
Yeah.
a business is end to end, it's the employee life cycle. And I think where we get started is so often on ideating the role, finding that talent. I think for years and years, I saw customers come back to us, Bill, and say, that person was great, but here's why I lost them.
Yeah.
And, we a couple of years ago started building our onboarding product as a result. And I think that gets to a little bit of the potential here, which is, if we can deliver a great onboarding, we can start that journey off on the right foot. We can hand that person off to you, and then you can develop an outcome for that business owner, that employee that no one fathomed at the end of the day. And I think a little bit of it is it goes back to my own journey of you know putting off doing things as a small business owner just because there's so much going on
Yeah.
that it injures you in the long run. I remember adding someone to payroll like way late in time and getting the text being like, "Hey, am I showing up to work tomorrow?" That's a bad look,
Yeah.
right? We
100%.
owe people context, we owe them clarity. Small businesses are competing, as we both just spent so much time talking about, with so many more companies than they ever realized. And I think we get to level the playing field for these two, for Main Street,
Yeah.
right? For vibrant communities.
If I can make one more comment on that, because this is so important to me. Part of certainly who we've chosen to partner with. And one of the things I love about working with you in every conversation we have is you bring an enormous amount of joy
Hey,
to your
we
job.
have to love what we
You're
do,
an
man.
incredibly positive guy, and just kudos to you for that. But I think when we know that the journey that we're on, look, we're in the business of making money. Okay, let's be clear. We're a publicly traded company. I have shareholders that care about what we're doing every day. But if you can all kind of wrap your head around the idea that there is genuine joy and satisfaction in what we are able to do for our clients and that our partners feel that way as well, that's how we keep employees.
Yeah.
Like, don't think for a moment that it's not hard for us to keep our 19,000 employees
All right.
happy. We've got turnover just like everybody else. And we're having to learn the same lessons we profess should be learned by our clients, which is there better be joy here. There better be expectation of growth. There better be a pathway by which to grow. We've learned hard lessons on that.
Yeah.
So when we pick partners that we work with, and I would like to assume when you pick partners like us, it is born of that common vision.
Yep.
That at the end of the day, some level of our job satisfaction will be born of the joy seeing the success in our clients.
I mean, there's this great interview question you can often ask, which is like someone's views on capitalism. It's all about the insight of like, we do this work because if we're doing well, the outcome is, it's giving back 10, 20 times more
Yep.
to society. I think on that, maybe as like a closing question, this is a very specific one, but we talked a lot about finding the right talent, growing your business, thinking about the future. Retention is key. What are you seeing? as y'all are guiding small businesses this year, a very difficult, healthcare renewal year, on what they can think about to offer that helps just improve retention a little bit more. Because sometimes it's not just the benefits, right? There's a whole litany of things that, maybe business owners are not aware of today. Just want to give you some space on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I'm going to use an example.
Please.
And I'm not picking on a type of health insurance plan, but this is a good analogy for so many conversations that we have with small business clients. A lot of business owners will choose a high deductible health plan. And some of our viewers will know what that means, right? And they'll choose it because they have an HSA and they're going to set aside their money pre-tax, and some of it's going to carry year over year. And
That's so complex.
it's great, right? It sounds beautiful. Well, there's two problems. The first is that if you don't demonstrate at the time of onboarding that that's the type of benefit that it is, a lot of employees don't understand the benefits. And so a lot of your viewers, probably a lot of your clients, have gone through the experience of having a health insurance program that when somebody finally used it, they were like, I thought you had health insurance. Well, we do, but you got to get to a $5,000 deductible. I use that as an illustration to say, really, that retention strategy comes from, again, listening to your employees, but making sure that the choices that you're making that are designed to be a contributor to your retention strategy, right? Benefits are not there just because the owner wants them.
Yeah.
It is entirely about attracting and retaining great employees. Is it working? Is that strategy working? Is it resonating? If I went up to your employee tomorrow and I said, why do you participate in the 401k? And they said, I don't. What does that tell you?
Oh man, there's so much, there's a knowledge gap, there's an education gap.
Right.
Completely.
So the question you have to ask yourself within your retention strategy isn't, do I have them? It's, how are they being articulated? How am I evangelizing the investment that I make as a business owner into all of these benefits? Because you know what? A single parent, dental insurance means an awful lot.
Yeah.
But it means an awful lot more if you explain that it includes orthodontia, right? If you have a vision program, if you have a program, for example, that says, hey, you can cover your family on health, you can cover your kids on dental, you and your kids on dental, and you cover yourself on vision because you're like Bill, that's the only one that's blind, can't see far and can't see near. Having that flexibility is a commitment to your employees that you're doing things for all of them.
Yeah.
Based on what their specific needs are. But in doing so, you're making a statement. If you articulate that that's part of your strategy, then there's value in that. There's retention in that. If all you do is just put it on a piece of paper, slide them over and say, open enrollments in, sign up, there's no value in that. Your investment is being wasted.
Yeah. I love the specifics of this, and I think we've covered the full kind of employee journey. I know there's more questions. We'll follow up in writing for those. I know we're at time, but Bill, this partnership, I think this whole dialogue is emblematic of it. Thank you. Thank you, Paychex. This was incredible, man.
It's such a pleasure to be invited to do this, and nice visit to Houston, Texas.
Thanks again for coming down.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This is great to be with you again, and I hope we can do more of these in the future.
Definitely. We owe it to the community. For those that joined today, thank you so much. Okay. Take care. Cheers.